The bold shell fragments are nonetheless embedded in the pink ceramite whilst my hands discover them. Tiny slivers of steel that survived the effect that killed 3 orcs and protected Brother Sergeant Aramis in Zeno's blood thick enough to gum the servo joints at his knees. I worked them loose with the brink of my cleansing blade, my twisted fingers making the assignment tougher than it need to be, more difficult than it'd be for ordinary arms. For human arms, for arms that had now not been warped by means of organs that grew incorrect, and hormones that flooded my machine in patterns the apothecaries could not control. The steel comes unfastened with a smooth click on that appears too loud in the silence of the armory, and I set the fragments aside in the series tray where they may be blessed and melted down and reforged into new ammunition, because not anything is wasted in the service of the Emperor. Now not even the shrapnel that bounces off the armor of his angels. I'm Dren, and I clean the war gear of beings who performed what I couldn't, who have become what I was meant to be, who stand 8 feet tall in power armor that I will never put on except to maintain it, to shine it, to put off the gore and carbon scoring and blessed promethium residue that marks their service to the chapter. My palms shake as I paintings, no longer from fatigue, although I'm worn out, continually tired, but from the way my bones grew while the osmodular implant went wrong, developing spurs and angles that press against nerves and tendons in ways that send small shocks of pain through my fingers with every motion. The pain is steady, has been steady for the 3 years given that they pulled me from the sarcophagus and explained that I had failed, that my frame had rejected the gene seed, that I'd never be a blood angel. But I ought to serve them, and service is its own shape of honor, even though the honor tastes like ash once I swallow it. The heady scent of weapon oil strikes a chord in my memory of my father's makeshift rat in shape. The way it smelled of historic grease and desperation. The manner he could test the seals before each water run across the burning sands of Balakundis, making sure the fit would protect him from the radiation that killed slowly, that turned flesh cancerous and bones brittle, that marked every infant born on that hell global with mutations that ranged from more arms to organs that grew outside the frame. My father died while I used to be 7 years vintage, killed with the aid of cannibal raiders who desired our trib's water cache, who reduced him open with rust-pitted blades and left him to bleed out within the red dust at the same time as my mom held my face against her chest so I would not see. So I no longer watched the lifestyles go away his eyes, even though I heard his screams, heard them cut off mid-sound in a manner that advised me exactly while he stopped being alive and began being meat. That became the manner of Balsecundis, wherein lifestyles changed into measured not in years, however in survival periods, in the areas between attacks and droughts and radiation storms, in which every breath of air tasted like steel and each sip of water might be your closing. My tribe became called the Broken Blade, named for the ancient energy sword fragment we carried as a sacred relic, believing it were touched by Sanguinius himself at some stage in the exquisite crusade. Although looking again, I recognize it was in all likelihood just debris from a few lengthy forgotten warfare, given meaning handiest by way of our desperate want to trust that the angel cared approximately us, that our struggling mattered to something greater than the easy mechanics of survival on a useless global orbiting a demise solar. My mom bore the stigmata of radiation sickness the manner maximum girls on Balsecundis did, with lesions that wept clear fluid and tumors that grew under her skin like small stones, with hair that fell out in clumps and teeth that loosened in her jaw, until she ought to simplest consume the softest GR, the type we made from floor insects and the few hardy plant life that grew inside the deep canyons wherein the radiation become less excessive. She was 28 years vintage while my father died, and he or she regarded 50, appeared historic, gave the look of dying taking walks. But she turned into sturdy in the way that subjects on a Hell International, robust sufficient to train me a way to continue to exist, a way to scavenge in the ruins of the ancients, a way to fight off the fireplace scorpions that hunted in packs and will kill a grown man with an unmarried sting from their neurotoxic tails. I showed fewer mutations than maximum kids, which changed into considered lucky, taken into consideration blessed, as if the Emperor himself had marked me for something more than death younger inside the barren region. Even though success is simply every other phrase for random danger, for the genetic lottery that determines which radiation-broken sperm fertilizes, which radiation-broken egg, creating kids who stay, or youngsters who die screaming in their first hours as their organs did not shape correctly. I had all my hands and feet. Both my eyes worked nicely. My backbone became directly. My coronary heart beat in its proper rhythm. And for those small mercies, my mom thanked the Emperor every night time before we slept in our trib's shelter. A cave bolstered with scrap metallic and blessed with prayers that did nothing to hold out the radiation, but made us sense more secure. Made us sense like we had been extra than animals waiting to die. The sky darkened with the thunder of thunderhawks on my 13th birthday, which became now not in reality my birthday, but the day my mother had decided to mark because the anniversary of my delivery. In view that precise dates supposed nothing on a world in which time was measured via the passage of caravans and the exchange of radiation styles, the aircraft got here down from the stars like angels themselves, their engines screaming, their weapons arrays gleaming within the susceptible daylight that filtered via Ball Secundi's toxic environment. And every member of each tribe inside 3 days' travel began to move closer to Angel's Fall, towards the vicinity of Task, where the Blood Angels would pick new aspirants, new boys who would be given the chance to come to be extra than human, to emerge as transhuman, to emerge as the selected warriors of Sanguinius. My mother wept blood tears when she painted my face with the tribal markings, the radiation having damaged the small vessels at the back of her eyes, so that her tears had been constantly tinged crimson continually gave the look of she become crying blood, which seemed appropriate given what I was approximately to try. Her palms shook as she drew the symbols on my cheeks and brow, symbols that marked me as broken blade, as worthy of attention, as a person who had survived long sufficient to be tested. And her lips moved in prayer, asking the Emperor to offer me energy, asking Sanguinius to manual my steps, asking that I might grow to be one among his angels, that I would rise above the desert and serve in glory, that my existence would count number in ways that hers in no way had, in no way ought to. You will become extra than human, my son, she stated, her voice breaking, her phrases coming through lips that had been cracked and bleeding. You will become a god's personal weapon. You'll fly a number of the stars. You will bring the Emperor's justice to his enemies. And whilst you fight, while you kill, you will do it with our blood on your veins, with our energy for your bones, with our prayers sporting you ahead. I assumed her, believed it with absolutely the religion of someone who has never known something but struggling, who has been raised on testimonies of angels who fell from the heavens and saved the determined, who carried the blood of Sanguinius in their bodies and couldn't die, could not be stopped, couldn't fail. I thought that I would be selected, that I'd be converted, that I would escape the hell international that had killed my father and was slowly killing my mother, that I might become lovely and horrible and eternal. I used to be 13 years vintage and I understood nothing approximately the cost of transformation, approximately what it intended to have your body torn aside and rebuilt, about the rate paid with the aid of folks who fail, approximately the horror of being caught among human and transhuman without a way ahead and no manner returned. The trek to Angel's Fall took 6 days throughout terrain that killed dozens of aspirants before they ever reached the location of undertaking. Across wastes in which the radiation changed into sturdy sufficient to make your tooth ache and your imaginative and prescient blur. In which hearth scorpions hunted in the rocks and mutant raiders attacked inside the darkness. Where boys from special tribes fought every different for scraps of food and drops of water. Already starting the competition that would decide who lived and who died. I traveled with others from close-by tribes. Boys I had visible at the exquisite gatherings wherein tribes would meet to exchange and share information. Boys who have become something like buddies during the 6 days. Even though friendship is an odd aspect to claim when you recognize that only a handful of the loads marching towards Angel's Fall will continue to exist. Garan turned into robust, constructed just like the warriors of old, with muscle groups that appeared too huge for his frame, and a thoughts that labored slowly however very well, processing every problem with cautious deliberation before performing. He had killed 3 men by the time he changed into 12. Killed them in defense of his tribe's water, killed them along with his bare hands when the ammunition for his tribe's single operating car gun ran out. And he wore their teeth on a twine around his neck as evidence of his worth. He shared his water with me on the second one day whilst my canteen ran dry, and I shared my dried insect rations with him on the 4th day when his food ran out. And we each knew that after we reached Angel's Fall, whilst the pain started, we would ought to kill every different. But till then, we may be brothers, ought to assist each different continue to exist the desolate tract that desired us lifeless. Mikhail becomes smart, small, and brief, and usually thinking 3 steps in advance, constantly planning, usually looking for the angle that could maintain him alive, the approach that might give him a bonus. He ought to examine the land the manner my mother should study the radiation styles, understanding wherein water might be discovered, where shelter will be made, and which chance would come from. And he stored us alive through the worst of the journey, via the radiation storm at the 5th day that killed 30 aspirants who could not find shelter in time, through the fireplace scorpion percent that attacked at the night time of the 3rd day and dragged boys screaming into the darkness. His palms have been too small to be a warrior's palms, his body too mild to wear electricity armor nicely, but his thoughts become sharp as any blade. And that I notion that if cleverness become what the blood angels valued, he would virtually be selected. We arrived at Angel's Fall at the morning of the 7th day, exhausted, dehydrated, 1/2 lifeless from radiation publicity and lack of sleep, however alive. Which became greater than could be said for the hundreds who had started the journey, however, might never entire it. The location of mission changed into a massive structure carved into the facet of a canyon, historic beyond understanding, marked with symbols that harm to have a look at too long. Blessed by Sanguinius himself throughout the outstanding campaign, whilst he walked amongst his people and selected the great of them to serve at his aspect. The entrance become guarded by means of servitors, half-human machines with weapons grafted in which their palms had been with optical sensors replacing their eyes with Vox gadgets wherein their mouth need to be. And they scanned every aspirant as we exceeded, recording our genetic profiles, checking us against some fashionable acknowledged only to the blood angels, identifying in that second whether or not we have been really worth checking out or must be grew to become a way to die in the barren region. I surpassed the experiment, felt alleviation flood through me like bloodless water, like the first breath after drowning. Due to the fact passing the experiment intended I had a chance, intended my genetics had been near enough to natural human stock that the gene seed might take, may combine, would possibly transform me into something extra. Garvin exceeded as nicely, his massive frame and apparent power making him an ideal candidate. But Mikhail became away. His genetic profile showing markers that the servitors taken into consideration too divergent, too mutated, too far from the baseline that the transformation required. He screamed as the servitors pressured him back toward the desolate tract. Screamed that he had come thus far, that he deserved a threat, that his cleverness ought to count number for something. But the servitors did not care about cleverness or dedication or the 6 days of horror he had continued to reach this region. They cared most effective approximately genetic compatibility, approximately the cold mathematics of transformation achievement fees, approximately the truth that his body might reject the gene seed and waste sources that could be used on aspirants with better odds. I watched him disappear into the wilderness, watched him vanish past the rocks on the canyon entrance, and I felt some things smash interior me. A few innocents about the equity of the choice method, some belief that well worth measured in individual rather than genetics. Mikkel had stored us alive, had used his intelligence to overcome barriers that power couldn't defeat, had validated himself extra treasured than half the aspirants who handed the experiment. However, his price meant nothing because his chromosomes were wrong due to the fact the radiation had broken his DNA in approaches that made him incompatible with the gene seed. He might die inside the wilderness, in all likelihood inside days, possibly screaming for water or torn apart through fire scorpions, and no one would keep in mind his call. No one would mark his passing due to the fact he had failed the first test via no fault of his own, via simple genetic bad good fortune. The riggers started out straight away. Hundreds of aspirants competing for perhaps 50 slots, competing through physical challenges designed to check power and persistence and pain tolerance. Through fight trials where we fought every other with crude guns, even as blood angels watched from above in their pink armor, stunning and terrible and absolutely inhuman. Thus far past us that searching at them harm, that seeing what we'd emerge as became almost worse than knowing we might fail. We ran via canyons in the darkness, climbed cliffs without ropes or protection gear, jumped across chasms with crude hang gliders crafted from scrap metallic and animal hide. And with every check, more aspirants died, falling into darkness or overwhelmed via rock slides, or in reality collapsing from exhaustion and dehydration. There are bodies giving out under the stress of challenges designed to push us beyond human limits. Garvin died on the third day of trials, stung by a fire scorpion at some stage in a canyon run in which we needed to navigate through their looking grounds without guns or safety. I used to be 10M in advance after I heard him scream. Heard the sound cut off too fast. Heard the wet gurgling that intended the neurotoxin become already working, paralyzing his respiratory system, suffocating him at the same time as his heart nonetheless beat. I grew to become back, noticed him convulsing at the ground, noticed the scorpion scuttling away with its stinger, nevertheless dripping venom. Saw his eyes lock onto mine with an expression I nonetheless see in my desires, an expression of betrayal, of accusation, as if I had failed. Him by no longer demise rather. I stood there for perhaps 5 seconds. 5 seconds that felt like hours, understanding that if I went again to assist him, I'd omit the checkpoint time and be removed. Knowing that if I kept running, I might live and he might die. And I chose to stay, selected to preserve strolling, selected to abandon my pal to demise by means of suffocation in a canyon complete of monsters. The guilt from that choice follows me still 3 years later, sits in my chest like a stone, grows heavier every time I do not forget his face, his eyes, the manner his hand reached toward me even as his lungs stopped working. I tell myself that going again could now not have saved him, that the neurotoxin works too speedy for any treatment, that I'd have died as well and carried out nothing. However, the rationalizations do no longer ease the guilt, do no longer alternate the fact that I chose my own survival over his existence, that I made the calculation the blood angels wanted us to make, that I proved I might do anything was necessary to prevail. They check us now not just for physical capability, I understand now, but for the willingness to make inhuman picks, to value project achievement over human connection, to end up the type of being who can watch their brothers die without hesitation, who can sacrifice something and everybody in provider to the bankruptcy and the emperor. I reached the checkpoint with 40 seconds to spare, joined the other aspirants who had survived the canyon run, and we checked out each other with eyes that have been already starting to exchange, already starting to turn out to be harder, chillier, extra, just like the eyes of the blood angels who watched us from their remarked platforms. We had misplaced friends, lost tribe associates, lost human beings we had traveled with and fought beside. And we felt not anything, ought to feel not anything, because feeling would be weak spot, could be human, could mark us as unsuitable for transformation. We had been being sorted, being filtered, being tested no longer only for bodily functionality, however for mental suitability, for the ability to end up something more than human, which required first turning into something much less, something emptier, something able to functioning without the emotional connections that define humanity. The gladiatorial trials came on the 5th day. Combat in an arena with weapons that had been slightly more than scrap steel, preventing other aspirants whilst the blood angels watched, evaluating our technique, our aggression, our will to live on. I killed 3 boys in that area, boys whose names I never discovered, whose faces I cannot forget about. And with every kill, something interior me died as properly. Some a part of my humanity burned away within the necessity of survival. Inside the understanding that this changed into what the blood angels wanted from us. Evidence that we might kill without hesitation, that we might do what changed into essential, regardless of the price, to our souls. The first boy I killed turned into small, quicker than me, however weaker, and I stuck him with a lucky blow that crushed his throat, watched him drown in his very own blood. Even as I stood over him with my improvised spear, watched his eyes cross dim, while hundreds of aspirants and dozens of blood angels observed without intervention, without mercy, without any signal that a human lifestyles had ended. The second boy changed into large, stronger, extra experienced in fight, and we fought for what felt like hours, but become probable less than 10 minutes, trading blows that broke bones and opened wounds, until I controlled to get internal his defend and pressure my blade via his ribs. Felt it scrape against bone, after which slide among them. felt the moment whilst it pierced his coronary heart, and his complete body went inflexible. Felt his blood pour warm over my palms as he died, along with his eyes locked on mine, along with his mouth seeking to form phrases that could by no means come. The 0.33 boy I killed quickly, effectively, without hesitation or right. Due to the fact by means of then I understood that this changed into surely what we did, what we needed to do. That hesitation was weakness and mercy become dying. That to become a blood angel, supposed first turning into a killer, becoming a person capable of taking existence without mirrored image or regret. Of the 600 who commenced the rigors, most effective 50 remained by the 7th day. 50 aspirants who had confirmed themselves worth of consideration, who had survived demanding situations designed to kill the weak and reveal the strong, who stood before the blood angels in the excellent hall of angels, fall with our bodies blanketed in wounds and minds already starting to exchange, already starting to lose their humanity and guidance for what came subsequent. We smelled recycled air for the primary time in our lives. Air that did now not flavor of radiation or dust. Air that become easy in a manner we had never experienced. And the cleanness of it made me nauseous. Made my lungs ache due to the fact my body had adapted to breathing poison and now struggled to process something pure. The servitors moved among us, mechanical and unique, measuring our dimensions, taking blood samples, scanning our genetic profiles with gadget that hummed with electricity and cause. And I watched them with an aggregate of curiosity and unease, questioning in the event that they had as soon as been human like us. Questioning in the event that they remembered what it felt like to have dreams and hopes and fears, or if those matters had been burned away for the duration of their conversion, leaving most effective the mechanical efficiency that defined their life. A servo cranium floated beyond my face, its empty eye sockets fitted with pink optical sensors that scanned my retinas, and that I felt a chill run through me. Felt the first real know-how that becoming a blood angel may require losing parts of myself that would by no means be recovered. That transformation changed into not just bodily, but psychological. That the angels I had worshipped from the wilderness is probably something apart from human in ways I had never considered. The 72-hour vigil began without right or rationalization. 50 aspirants pressured to remain standing in the super corridor without rest, without sleep, with none allowance for the exhaustion that already made our legs shake and our imaginative and prescient blur. Blood servitors patrolled the edges of the corridor. Huge cybernetic constructs with weapons grafted to their arms and monitoring systems that by no means blinked, never appeared away, never overlooked the moment while an aspirant's legs gave out or their eyes closed for extra than a second. I watched them take boys away. Boys who without a doubt couldn't hold awareness to any extent further. Boys who collapsed regardless of their dedication, regardless of their prayers, in spite of their determined need to succeed. And I wondered what happened to them, whether they died, or have been converted into servitors themselves, whether failure right here supposed loss of life, or something worse than dying, something that could leave them alive but emptied, functioning, however no longer actually living. By means of the second one day, I used to be hallucinating, seeing my mother's status within the corner of the hall with her blood tears streaming down her face. Seeing Garan and Mikhail and the 3 boys I had killed within the area. They all observing me with expressions I couldn't read, could not understand. Expressions that could were accusation or forgiveness, or really the blank regard of the lifeless searching on the dwelling. I bit through my own tongue to stay wide awake. Used ache as an anchor to recognition. Tasted copper and salt as blood crammed my mouth. Swallowed it instead of spit because showing weak spot could be failure. Because each movement changed into evaluated due to the fact we have been being examined now not only for bodily persistence, but for intellectual resilience, for the capacity to. Characteristic past the factor in which human obstacles ought to force us to forestall. Through the 0.33 day, I used to be no longer certain what became actual and what became hallucination. Not assured that the blood angels looking us had been truly present, or had been just visions my exhausted brain had created to make sense of the blurred figures in crimson armor that seemed to glide at the edges of my perception. Dozen aspirants had been taken away with the aid of them, dozen failures who might in no way come to be blood angels. And the 34 folks who remained stood with legs that slightly supported our weight, with minds that functioned on intuition greater than aware concept, with our bodies that had been driven beyond their design specs, and were starting to fail in small but crucial methods. My coronary heart beat irregularly, skipping beats after which racing to seize up, and I wondered if I used to be loss of life, if I might fail, now not because I selected to sleep, but due to the fact my body really gave out beneath the pressure. Because I had inherited my mom's radiation-broken coronary heart, and it couldn't take the stress of the vigil. The sanguinary clergyman arrived inside the last hour of the 0.33 day. Figures in golden armor that appeared to glow with their very own light, sporting between them a chalice that radiated electricity I may want to experience in my bones, in my blood, within the deepest parts of my genetic code that identified what the chalice contained, despite the fact that my conscious mind couldn't name it. The high priest intoned phrases in a language I did no longer recognize, but felt in my soul. Words that stated transformation and sacrifice, of blood and rebirth, of the angel who had died defensive the emperor and whose genetic legacy could live on in the one's discovered worth to hold it. He moved among us. The chalice held before him like a spiritual artifact, just like the most holy relic. Because that's what it became. The cup that held the processed gene seed fabric, the blood of Sanguinius, diluted and modified, but nonetheless containing the essence of divinity, nonetheless wearing the capability to convert human flesh into transhuman perfection. "You drink the blood of the angel," the excessive priest said, his voice amplified by means of the Vox structures in his helmet, echoing via the awesome corridor like the voice of the emperor himself. "You'll be reborn as his sons, as the selected warriors of the 9th Legion, as the defenders of humanity and the destroyers of the emperor's enemies. Or you will be ate up by using what you cannot contain, and your failure will function warning to individuals who comply with. There is no disgrace and loss of life all through transformation. Handy is shame in refusing to strive it. Best shame in selecting secure mediocrity over glorious sacrifice. The chalice got here to me held with the aid of palms encased in golden ceramite, and that I regarded into its depths and saw a liquid that was red like blood, however moved wrong. Moved with a viscosity that advised it changed into extra than liquid, more than easy organic fluid, something alive in methods that made my genetic code scream in recognition and terror. I hesitated for possibly seconds. Seconds in which I understood that drinking from this chalice might alternate me irrevocably, might both transform me into something wonderful or kill me in approaches that might make the deaths in the area look merciful. After which I drank due to the fact I had come too far to prevent now, due to the fact turning lower back would imply admitting that Garvin and Mikhail and all of the others who had died to get us right here had died for not anything. The liquid burned now not with heat, however with bloodless. With a chill that unfolded from my throat into my chest, after which outward through my entire frame, following my circulatory machine like ice water in my veins. I tasted copper and something else. Something I had no words for. Something ancient and terrible and divine. The genetic essence of a being who were more than human even before the Emperor made him into a Primarch, whose DNA carried codes and instructions that could rewrite my body at the cell level that might trigger modifications the human genome became never designed to help. My imaginative and prescient blurred, my hearing dwindled to white noise. My feel of stability vanished, and that I felt myself falling via darkness that regarded to have no bottom. And my remaining conscious concept earlier than the darkness took me absolutely, was simple and determined and doomed to remain unanswered. I might be an angel. I'm able to serve the Emperor. I'm able to. I woke into darkness. Right into a darkness so entire that for a moment I had died. Concept the transformation had failed right away. And this changed into what loss of life felt like. This absolute absence of sensation. This void wherein nothing existed besides my thoughts. However, then I have become privy to sounds, faint mechanical sounds, the hum of lifestyle support systems, the whisper of recycling air processors, the distant rhythm of something that would have been prayers or might have been machine code. And that I understood that I used to be now not useless, however entombed, sealed in a few form of existence assist casket in which the transformation could take vicinity, wherein my frame could be rebuilt or would fail in the attempt. I could not move, couldn't open my eyes, could not make any sound through the tubes that filled my throat and connected at once to my lungs, forcing air inside and outside in a rhythm that felt incorrect, felt too slow or too fast, felt like a person else turned into breathing for me, even as I remained a passenger in my personal frame. I felt tubes in my fingers as nicely. Needles sunk deep into my veins, pumping fluids that burned bloodless, that made my muscle tissue spasm and my bones pain, that carried the genetic fabric and hormones and boom factors that could trigger the modifications the gene seed required. I could sense my heart beating, could experience it stuttering and racing and suffering to maintain rhythm. May want to experience something else developing subsequent to it. A second coronary heart forming from stem cells and genetic instructions pushing towards my other organs, making room for itself, whether or not my body had room to provide or not. Time stopped having meaning, stopped being something I should measure or tune or understand. There have been only periods of focus and periods of unconsciousness. Intervals where I used to be privy to the changes going on to my frame and periods where I used to be thankful to be unaware, in which the darkness took me and that I felt not anything, idea not anything, existed in a nation of blessed emptiness, where I did now not need to confront what became being completed to me. The audio implants within the casket whispered constantly, feeding me statistics I couldn't method, litanies in high Gothic that my brain absorbed without know-how. Tactical statistics and fight protocols and the records of the blood angels from their founding to the existing. 10,000 years of provider to the emperor, compressed into record streams that flowed into my thoughts like water filling a vessel. Although I used to be now not certain there has been room for all this records, not certain my mind could keep it without breaking. The transformation took place in degrees, each organ implanted and given time to combine. Every alternate monitored through the apothecaries who worked within the corridor of sarcophagi, who moved amongst hundreds of caskets in which aspirants underwent the identical manner, where some succeeded and have become blood angels, even as others failed and died, or have been transformed into servitors, or if they had been very unlucky, survived and stayed someplace among human and transhuman, trapped in our bodies that had changed, however not enough, that carried the curse of the gene seed. Without its blessing, my secondary heart started out beating within the fourth week, started out pumping blood in a rhythm that did now not healthy my primary heart, developing a sensation of dislocation, of having extraordinary timings running in my chest, preventing for dominance, suffering to synchronize, however in no way quite accomplishing it. The osmodula implant came next, a small organ that might secrete hormones to strengthen my bones, to lead them to greater dents, to permit them to drink in ceramic compounds, and come to be tougher than human bones should ever be, strong sufficient to aid the large muscle tissues that would develop, sturdy enough to face up to influences that could shatter everyday skeletal shape. I felt my bones crack and reform, felt them growing thicker and longer, felt my frame stretching in approaches that made each movement anguish, that made me thankful for the paralytic retailers that kept me from transferring, from seeking to get away the casket, from tearing on the tubes and needles in a desperate try to make the pain stop. The Biscopia came inside the 1/3 month, an organ that might enhance muscle bone, that might take the workout I'd eventually do and extend its consequences 100-fold, that could allow me to grow muscle mass that could crush metal and tear through armor with my bare hands. I felt my muscle mass twitching and developing, felt them urgent in opposition to my skin from the inner, felt my body mass increasing daily, week by way of week, turning into something large than human, something greater. But the growth became not even, now not symmetrical, no longer the right enhancement the Biscopia turned into supposed to offer. A few muscles grew more than others, growing imbalances that the apothecaries tried to correct with extra hormones, with centered inhibitors, with desperate attempts to pressure my body to observe the pattern the gene seed demanded. By means of the 5th month, I was experiencing sensations I had no phrases for. Sensations that got here from organs I had by no means possessed before, from new glands and more suitable organs and changed structures that had been speculated to make me transhuman, but felt extra like they have been making me alien. Greater like they have been turning me into something that became neither human nor Astartes, however some 1/3 issue that should now not exist. My experience of taste changed, became more sensitive and greater particular, could discover compounds I had in no way recognized had been in my food, should flavor the molecular structure of the nutrient GRL they fed me through my tubes. My sense of scent superior until I could discover people by way of their heady scent by myself. Could inform what they'd eaten and after they had slept, and whether or not they were afraid, or irritated or calm. Data I had little need for, however, could not prevent processing. The hypno-conditioning performed continuously, carrying grooves in my mind, writing over my memories with new information, new loyalties, new functions. "You are a weapon of the Emperor," the litany said, repeated so frequently that the phrases lost which means and have become easy sounds, simple styles of vibration that my brain processed without aware thought. "You're his wrath made appear. You're the defenders of humanity. You are the chosen of Sanguinius. Your demise to the enemies of the Imperium. You serve without query. You fight without worry. You die without remorse." The memories of Sanguinius began bleeding into my consciousness inside the 6th month. Genetic recollections encoded in the gene seed exceeded down from the Primarch himself to each blood angel who carried his genetic legacy. I saw visions of Baal because it had been 10,000 years ago. Noticed Sanguinius strolling amongst his people earlier than the Emperor found him. Saw him gaining knowledge of to fly with wings that grew from his return like a few sort of angel from ancient Terran mythology. I felt his pleasure in flight, his sorrow at being extraordinary from his humans, his dedication to protect them even though they feared him. And for brief moments I was not. Dren, however, Sanguinius changed into no longer an aspirant, but a Primarch changed into experiencing reminiscences that had been older than my complete civilization. But the recollections were wrong, corrupted, twisted by something I couldn't discover or apprehend. Sanguinius's loss of life played time and again in my mind. His final battle with Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit. His sacrifice to wound the arch-traitor earlier than the Emperor arrived. His ultimate moments as the life left his body and his soul departed into something comes after death for beings just like the Primarchs. The memory should have been wonderful. Have to have shown his courage and the aristocracy. Have to have inspired me to serve with the identical determination he had proven. As an alternative, it changed into horror, was madness, turned into Sanguinius, screaming my name as he died, changed into his eyes locating mine throughout 10,000 years of time, and asking why I had now not stored him, why I had let him die, why I used to be not there when he wished me. I attempted to scream, however the tubes avoided it. Attempted to provide an explanation for that I had no longer even been born whilst he died, that I couldn't have helped him, that his dying was records, and I was nothing but a failed aspirant who had under the influence of alcohol his blood and become deciding to buy that presumption. The visions grew worse, grew greater frequent, have become my primary fact, at the same time as my bodily frame have become a distant factor, a meat jail that held me at the same time as my mind lived within the past, skilled the dying of the angel time and again. Felt his anguish as Horus overwhelmed his throat and broke his wings, and ended his life with contempt and hatred and satisfaction at destroying something so best. Round month 7, something went basically wrong. Went wrong in methods that the apothecaries couldn't restoration, couldn't catch up on, couldn't triumph over with additional hormones or inhibitors or determined interventions. I heard the alarm klaxons through my audio pickups, heard them blaring in the corridor of sarcophagi, heard the apothecaries shouting to each other in scientific terminology I should barely understand, but knew supposed catastrophe, knew intended failure, knew intended that my body changed into rejecting the gene seed in methods that might kill me in the event that they did no longer act straight away. Concerned 27 experiencing acute immunodeficiency crumble. One apothecary stated, his voice clinically indifferent while he defined my forthcoming death. Gene seed organs failing to combine. Rejection reaction is catastrophic. His immune gadget is attacking the implants faster than we can suppress the response. His secondary coronary heart is arrhythmic. Another voice stated, woman, belonging to one of the few women who served as apothecaries in the chapter. Sample indicates it'll fail inside 72 hours, and whilst it fails, it'll flood his gadget with necrotic tissue that his primary coronary heart cannot technique. The OS modular is secretreading hormones erratically. A third voice added mechanical, likely belonging to a servitor programmed to monitor my vital symptoms. Bone growth is accelerating in random styles, growing inner spurs which can be piercing surrounding muscle groups and main blood vessels. Advise on the spot surgical intervention. The Biscopere is producing tumorous growths rather than more suitable muscle fibers, the primary apothecary stated, and that I heard something in his voice that might were frustration or sadness or simple medical interest in a surprising outcome. His muscular tissues is growing, but the tissue is non-useful, likely precancerous, certainly compromising his ability to transport, even if we are able to solve the opposite troubles. What approximately the black carapace? Someone asked, and that I felt cold terror flood through me at the point out of that organ, the final implant, the one that might allow me to interface with strength armor that would make me virtually a Stardust. Starting to grow, however, displaying instantaneous rejection symptoms. The lady apothecary stated his skin is rejecting it, trying to push it out, developing necrotic patches across his torso which might be weeping pus, and showing signs and symptoms of secondary contamination. If we proceed with full black carapace integration, it'll kill him. And if we cast off what's already grown, it will leave him with everlasting scarring and loss of sensation across 40% of his body. The sanguinary monks arrived, their voices wearing the authority of those who spoke for the chapter itself, who made selections approximately lifestyles and loss of life with the identical clinical precision they used to manage the gene seed stocks to decide which aspirants might live and which would die. Has the gene seed been compromised? The excessive priest requested, and I heard in his voice now not problem for me. However, for the valuable genetic cloth that had been implanted in my body, material that had come from Sanguinius himself that changed into irreplaceable and infinitely treasured. The progenoid glands have not but matured, one of the apothecaries answered. We are able to extract 6 of the implanted organs earlier than general loss. Can salvage the gene seed cloth to be used in destiny aspirants. But the challenge himself is beyond recovery, beyond transformation into complete arty status. Mental repute? The high priest asked, and I felt a surge of something that might were wish, could have been the desperate notion that even though my frame had failed, my mind is probably intact, might be well worth preserving. Showing symptoms of proto-black rage, the woman apothecary said, and the desire died earlier than it had completely fashioned. The genetic recollections of Sanguinius's death are manifesting at some stage in transformation. That's extremely uncommon. Usually, the black rage best seems in absolutely converted arties who've served for decades or centuries. His mind is experiencing the demise visions even as his body undergoes the bodily changes, creating a feedback loop that is accelerating each the mental and physical breakdown. Moreover, red thirst manifestation is advanced. Some other voice brought. Concern is exhibiting signs of blood obsession even whilst comeomeos. His brain hobby shows patterns consistent with feeding fantasies with the desperate starvation for blood that defines the curse our bankruptcy carries. That is going on months before it ought to, if it must occur in any respect, in a failed aspirant. The discussion persevered above me, around me, approximately me, but by no means which include me. The apothecaries and sanguinary monks debating my destiny with the same tone they might use to talk about a piece of device, a failed thing, a system that had no longer performed to specifications. I used to be not a person to them, no longer Dren, who had survived the trials, and drunk from the purple grail, and persevered 7 months of soreness in pursuit of transformation. I was concerned 27, a genetic experiment that had failed, a waste of sources and gene seed. Something to be disposed of or salvaged, depending on which alternative provided extra fee to the bankruptcy. Options, the excessive priest said, his voice cutting via the controversy like a blade. Supply me the alternatives for difficulty 27. Euthanasia, the primary apothecary stated right away. Cease his struggling speedy. Extract what gene seed organs may be salvaged. Recycle his biomass according to standard protocols. This would be the mercy might spare him years of pain and disorder. Might allow him to die before he studies the whole horror of his failed transformation. Servator conversion. Some other recommended his mind continues to be functional regardless of the psychological anomalies. His frame is broken, however operational. We could convert him into a labor servitor for the fortress monastery. Let him serve in that capability for whatever years his compromised gadget can preserve life. Bankruptcy, sir, the lady apothecary said quietly, almost reluctantly. Uncommon honor for one who has persevered. A lot might allow him to serve the chapter in aid capacity, to keep war gear and protect the fort, while had to stay inside the shadow of the Blood Angels and find purpose in that service. The silence that followed stretched lengthy enough that I started to believe that they had selected euthanasia, that they might open my casket and give up my lifestyles before I woke, that I might die having in no way visible the result of my failed transformation, by no means regarded what I had come to be. But then Brother Chaplain Sarath spoke, his voice sporting the authority of one who served as the religious guide to the chapter, who understood no longer simply the mechanical requirements of transformation, however the mental needs of people who tried it. Concern 27 has earned the proper depict, Sarah stated slowly, carefully, each phrase selected with precision. He survived the pains on Bal Secundis. He continued the vigil. He drank from the Crimson Grail, understanding the cost. He has suffered 7 months of transformation that could have killed most people inside the first week. He has verified his dedication, his religion, his willingness to sacrifice the entirety and carrier to the chapter and the Emperor. We can wake him. We can give an explanation for his state of affairs, and we can allow him to determine whether he needs euthanasia or provider as a bankruptcy serf. This is irregular, someone objected. But Sarah cut them off before they might maintain. Irregular, but now not unparalleled, he stated firmly. The Blood Angels were founded on the principle that honor comes in many bureaucracy, that service to the Emperor can be given by means of all who own the desire to serve, that we do no longer discard folks that attempt greatness merely because they fail to obtain it. Problem 27 might be given the choice, and we are able to honor something decision he makes. I woke for the primary time in 7 months. Woke to pain extra complete than anything I had skilled all through the pains. Woke to a body that felt incorrect in every manner. That moved wrong. That answered to my instructions slowly and poorly. That harm with an ache that had no location because it became everywhere. Became every nerve firing right now. Turned into every muscle cramping and each bone aching. And every organ suffering to function in a machine that had been broken beyond its capacity to heal. I tore free from the nutrient tubes, pulled them from my throat and fingers and groin with moves that dispatched clean waves of ache through my apprehensive machine, vomited blood and amniotic fluid across the ground of the clinical bay. Tried to face and fell immediately because my legs could no longer assist my weight properly because the bones had grown incorrect and the muscle mass had been imbalanced and my sense of equilibrium was destroyed. I stuck my reflection in a polished steel floor. Noticed what I had emerge as. Saw the monster the transformation had made me. My face become nonetheless recognizably human, still recognizably mine, but swollen and distorted. With eyes that were too massive for my cranium, with a jaw that had grown heavier and more stated, with enamel that had modified to something among human and Astartes, too massive for my mouth, pressing towards my lips, making it hard to close my jaw nicely. My torso become a horror of failed black carapace, patches of hardened tissue that gave the impression of dark brown leather-based, cracked and weeping clean fluid, protecting possibly 40% of my chest and back in irregular patterns that could never heal, that might crack in addition on every occasion I moved, that could mark me as a failed aspirant for the rest of my lifestyles. My arms have been too long for my frame, muscled but asymmetric. The left arm quite larger than the proper, both finishing in arms that were intended if you want to weigh down metallic, but instead had been twisted. The hands not pretty final properly, the bones having grown in patterns that pressed against tendons, and nerves in ways that sent regular signals of ache to my brain. My legs had been worse, strong enough to guide weight that might wreck human bones, however malformed. One slightly shorter than the alternative, developing a limp that could by no means heal, that would mark every step I took for the relaxation of my existence. I tried to scream, but my voice came out wrong. Got here out as something between human speech and the deeper register of an Astartes, a legitimate that belonged to neither one nor the alternative, that become discordant and worrying even to my own ears. Blood servitors moved to restrain me, their mechanical precision making resistance futile, Their augmented energy a long way extra than my compromised frame ought to produce, and they held me motionless whilst the apothecaries and sanguinary clergyman and brother chaplain Sarah entered the clinical bay to supply their judgment. Concerned 27, the excessive priest stated, and something in his tone made it clear he become the use of my designation in preference to any call due to the fact names had been for humans and I was no longer pretty someone anymore. Became something among categories, something that did no longer match in the neat organizational systems the Blood Angels used to classify their members. You've got failed the rigors of ascension. Your body has rejected the gene seed in ways that cannot be corrected, cannot be overcome, can't be compensated for via extra intervention. 6 organs were efficiently extracted and will be utilized in future aspirants. The gene seed material has been preserved and remains possible, so your struggling has now not been absolutely without price to the bankruptcy. I wanted to snigger at that last component. Desired to explicit the bitter humor in being told that my 7 months of agony were precious due to the fact they had salvaged some organs before I failed absolutely. However, my vocal cords could not produce laughter. Could best produce sounds that would have been crying or could have been something else entirely. You've got 3 options, Brother Chaplain Sarath stated, stepping ahead, his armor so black it regarded to drink and mild, his skull helm making him appear to be death itself, like the cease that waited for each person ultimately. First, euthanasia administered speedy and painlessly, allowing you to die with honor before your failed transformation becomes greater agonizing. 2D, Serftor conversion. Your mind would be wiped and your frame used for hard work or combat as wished. You will serve the bankruptcy, however, without focus or struggling. 0.33, you may pick out to serve as a bankruptcy serve to hold our war gear and shield our citadel to live and provider to the Blood Angels with complete attention of what you have got emerge as and what you've got lost. The selection must were clean, must were obvious. Euthanasia could stop the pain, would spare me from dwelling in a frame that harmed continuously. That would by no means be what I was supposed to end up. That could ring a bell in me with every breath of my failure. Serftor conversion might be merciful in its own manner, could remove my cognizance, and with it the struggling, the grief, the bitter information that I had come so near transformation only to fall short at the last second. However, even as I taken into consideration those alternatives, while I recounted their attraction, their mercy, their logic, I discovered myself speak me phrases I had now not consciously decided to say. I will nonetheless serve, I stated through blood-rawed lips, through a mouth that slightly worked, via vocal cords that produced sounds no human or Astartes ought to make. The bankruptcy, the Emperor, I will nonetheless serve. I can maintain your armor. I'm able to shield your castle. I can do what desires to be accomplished, although I'm able to by no means be what I desired to be. Brother Chaplain Sarah studied me for a long moment, his skull helm revealing nothing of something thoughts moved behind it, after which he nodded as soon as, a gesture that appeared to hold weight past its simple motion. Thoroughly. Issue 27 is redisated as Chapter Serf Dren. He will serve inside the armory underneath Master of the Forged Lion. He can be skilled inside the protection of sacred warge equipment. He could be given quarters appropriate to his station. And while we march to battle, he will defend our fort with anything power his compromised body can provide. He has earned the proper to serve in the shadow of what he could not come to be. I wept then, wept tears that were half of blood due to the fact my tear ducts had been broken in the course of the transformation. Wept with remedy and grief and sour shame. Wept for what I had misplaced and what I had barely gained. Wept for Garvin and Mikhail and my mother and my father and all of us who had died to get me to this second. Wept because I used to be still alive when so many others have been lifeless, and that I did not realize if survival became a blessing or a curse. The months of recuperation that accompanied had been nearly as agonizing as the transformation itself. Even though the anguish turned into specific, become physical therapy and surgical operation rather than genetic modification, turned into studying to apply my malformed frame in preference to having it modified towards my will. The apothecaries eliminated the most dangerous failed organs, the ones that might kill me if left in area, but others remained because removing them might be greater dangerous than leaving them alone. My secondary heart stayed arrhythmic and unreliable, beating to its personal rhythm that never quite synchronized with my primary heart. growing a sensation of dislocation that in no way went away. The failed black carapace stayed as nicely, too integrated with my skin to be appropriately removed, marking me completely as a failed aspirant, as someone who had drunk the blood of the angel and been determined wanting. I found out to stroll again with my uneven legs, discovered to atone for the limp, learned to distribute my weight in approaches that would not stress the bones that had grown wrong. I learned to apply my palms regardless of the way the fingers did now not close well, developed strategies for gripping and conserving and manipulating gadgets that worked around the limitations of my twisted joints and malformed tendons. I learned to speak clearly in spite of my altered vocal cords, practiced forming words until I could make myself understood without sounding absolutely inhuman. Though my voice could never sound quite right, would usually carry that edge of wrongness that marked me as neither human nor Astartes. I stuck my mirrored image frequently at some stage in the one's months, saw myself in polished metal and clear water and the empty eyes of servitors. And each time I was greatly surprised by using what I noticed, taken aback with the aid of the monster I had come to be. My face turned into still recognizably mine, however distorted, changed, marked via the failed transformation in approaches that could never heal. My body was too big for human, but far too small for Astartes, trapped in a center ground that made me conspicuous among each populations, made me glaringly wrong to anybody who checked out me. The scars from the failed black carapace cracked once I moved, wept fluid once I strained, jogged my memory constantly that I carried the mark of the angel, however no longer his blessing, that I have been touched through divinity and broken by means of it. I was 15 years antique, and that I knew I'd never be entire again. Knew that the relaxation of my existence could be lived in ache and obstacle. Knew that each day could be a reminder of what I had lost, of what I had tried to become and failed to gain. But I used to be alive, changed into aware, was able to service. And within the Imperium, those three things were enough to justify existence, have been enough to present motive to a lifestyles that had been damaged in pursuit of transformation. The armory became my home, have become my world, have become the vicinity wherein I spent every waking hour in service to the blood angels who had achieved what I could not. Master of the Forge, Thion assigned me to armor maintenance for the 5th organization, gave me duty for the sacred war equipment worn with the aid of 50 blood angels. 50 warriors who went to warfare in ceramite plate that I cleaned and blessed and repaired, who relied on their lives to device I maintained. The training changed into substantial, changed into months of learning from older serfs who had served for decades, who knew every aspect of electricity armor upkeep, from the macro scale upkeep to the micro adjustments that saved servo joints functioning smoothly. I learned the way to polish ceramite without scratching it, discovered the prayers that need to be spoken while working with sacred war gear, found out the way to identify damage patterns and expect disasters earlier than they passed off, discovered how to smooth bolters without detrimental the blessed mechanisms, found out the way to repair seals and update electricity cells and calibrate, focused on structures. The work was meditative, turned into repetitive in ways that allowed my thoughts to quiet, that gave me motive without requiring me to think about what I had turned out to be, that let me serve in concrete methods that produced measurable effects. The alternative serfs have become my circle of relatives, have become the simplest, those who understood what it's supposed to live in the shadow of the blood angels, to serve beings who had finished transformation at the same time as we had failed or by no means tried it. There was Theron, who had made it through 8 months of transformation before his vocal cords had been destroyed through a failed larynx implant, leaving him unable to speak, speaking best through sign language and written notes. There was Cinna, a girl whose family had served the blood angels for generations, who had selected to turn out to be a serf in preference to try transformation, who carried the institutional expertise of the chapter in her mind, and taught me more approximately the blood angels' records and traditions than any of the chaplain ever might. There was Cade, an old guy who had survived extra than 50 years as a serf in spite of having half of his face destroyed in an education coincidence, who had visible lots of aspirants strive transformation and fail, who had watched the chapter evolve via a long time of conflict and peace and internal battle. He had become something like a father to me, taught me the unwritten policies of serf lifestyles, the approaches to avoid interest, the techniques for coping with ache without remedy, the strategies for surviving in an area where we have been invisible most of the time, however scrutinized intensely whilst we made errors. Everyone folks has held that blade. Cade told me one night time whilst he observed me in my quarters with a razor in hand. Observed me taking into consideration the short reduce that would stop the ache and the shame and the consistent reminder of failure. Each failed aspirant has confronted the identical preference: to stay with what we've got grow to be, or to cease it earlier than the weight receives too heavy. But we serve, boy. We serve due to the fact provider is all we've got, all we can supply, all that justifies our persisted life in a universe that has no use for the vulnerable or the broken. I placed the blade down, not due to the fact the melancholy went away, but because Cade become right, due to the fact service became all I had, because killing myself would be one very last failure, one closing betrayal of everybody who had died to get me to date. I might live, could serve, would find something purpose existed for a failed aspirant in a chapter of Angels. Although that reason felt empty, even though the carrier felt meaningless, although each day become a reminder that I carried the curse of the blood angels without their glory. The daily habitual have become my anchor, have become the shape that stored me purposeful whilst the despair threatened to weigh down me. I woke at 0400 hours within the cramped dormitory that serfs shared, comfortable by the standards of maximum imperial citizens, however Spartan in comparison to the quarters wherein blood angels rested between campaigns. I finished my ablutions and stated my prayers to the Emperor and Sanguinius, soliciting for electricity to serve every other day, asking for cause in my carrier, asking that my failure might by some means make a contribution to the chapter's glory, although I should in no way take part in that glory immediately. From 0500 to 1200, I worked inside the armory, maintaining the war gear of the 5th Enterprise, cleaning blood and Xenos residue from camite plate, repairing damage, blessing every piece according to the proper rituals, ensuring that when the blood angels went to struggle, their device would no longer fail them. The work was physically worrying in spite of my compromised frame, requiring strength I barely possessed, requiring precision my twisted fingers struggled to offer. But I learned to compensate, discovered to use my obstacles creatively, found out to supply work that met the exacting standards the bankruptcy required. At 1200, I ate my unmarried meal of the day, protein paste and greens grown within the Fort Monastery's hydroponic space. Meals that turned into nutritious but bland, that stored me alive and useful, however furnished no delight, no consolation, no distraction from the steady consciousness of what I had come to be. I ate with different serfs, listened to their conversations, discovered their tales, discovered consolation in the shared expertise that we had been all broken in different ways, all serving in the shadow of beings who had carried out transformation whilst we had no longer. From 1300 to 1800, I returned to my duties, persevered the infinite cycle of preservation and restore, treated war tools that were blessed by using chaplain and worn with the aid of heroes, touched greatness each day whilst final in addition from it, then the bottom mutant within the underhive. From 1800 to 2000, I skilled in fight because all serfs must be capable of shield the castle monastery. When the blood angels march to battle, need to be capable of hold weapons and fight enemies despite the fact that we lack the improved skills of genuine Astartes. I learned to fireplace a laze gun, found out fundamental procedures, found out how to die in approaches that could serve the bankruptcy that could buy time for the blood angels to return and cleanse something had breached our defenses. From 200 to 200, I had private time. Time I commonly spent watching the blood angels train, watching them pass via fight drills with pace and charm my body could in no way reap. Looking them exhibit abilities I tried to benefit and did not expand. It changed into masochistic, turned into self-punishment, disguised as commentary. But I could not prevent watching. Could not stop evaluating what they were to what I used to be. Couldn't forestall calculating the distance between my broken form and their transhuman perfection. At 2100, I slept or tried to sleep. Though sleep changed into regularly tough, was often packed with nightmares of the transformation. Goals of sanguineous loss of life at the same time as calling my call. Visions of my failed organs growing internal me like tumors. Recollections of the lads I would killed in the arena and the buddies who had died throughout the pains. I woke often. Woke gasping and disoriented. Woke to pain from the failed black carapace that cracked once I moved in my sleep. Woke to the arrhythmic beating of my secondary coronary heart that created a sensation of wrongness I should by no means get away. The connection among serfs and blood angels was complex, was no longer quite grasp and servant, because that might mean a private connection that did now not exist, was extra like the dating between a person and the fixtures of their room, acknowledged when useful, overlooked when no longer, maintained while broken, replaced whilst past restore. Most blood angels by no means spoke to us, in no way stated our presence except when they needed something. Moved through the castle monastery as if we have been invisible, as if our carrier becomes so automated, so herbal, so predicted that it required no reputation or gratitude. But once in a while one could communicate to me, could acknowledge my lifestyles with some phrases that I might treasure for weeks later on, might turn over in my thoughts all through the long hours of protection work, studying each word for hidden which means, for approval or disapproval, for a few signal that my service mattered to beings who barely registered my existence. Brother Sergeant Aramis of the 5th Company every so often spoke to me after I maintained his armor, his deep voice resonating through his helmet's Vox system even if he become no longer actively transmitting. "Your paintings is adequate, Serf," he stated once. And the word good enough felt just like the highest praise I had ever received. Felt like validation that my damaged hands and compromised body may want to nevertheless produce something of fee, that my service became not absolutely worthless. The Emperor is served through all who give their really worth, from the mightiest primarch to the lowest servant. All make a contribution to his grand layout, in keeping with their talents. Brother Dante, a younger blood angel who had best finished his transformation 3 years in advance, requested about my scars as soon as, pointed on the failed black carapace that included my torso in irregular patterns of hardened tissue. "You have been an aspirant," he said, and it was not a query, but a declaration, reputation of what the scars supposed, of what they implied about my beyond and my failure. I defined briefly, described the pains and the transformation and the rejection that had left me damaged among human and Astartes. Described the choice I had made to serve in place of die, and something passed across his face that might were pity or might have been discomfort or could have been guilt. The expression of someone who had succeeded looking at a person who had failed, confronting the fact that transformation became no longer guaranteed, that some who drank from the pink grail have been destroyed with the aid of what they couldn't contain. He left quickly after that, said nothing greater. However, the short interplay haunted me for weeks, replayed in my thoughts all through my private hours, analyzed from every perspective. The angel had looked at me, had visible my scars, had diagnosed what they supposed, and his eyes had held something that might have been sympathy, might have been the know-how that I had attempted for the same transformation he had achieved, that only genetic danger separated us, that he could have been me if his frame had rejected the gene seed the manner mine had. The serf community changed into tight-knit in ways the blood angels may want to in no way be, certain collectively by shared trauma and shared carrier. Through the information that we had been all damaged, and that our brokenness created a connection the angels may want to never sense. Not all serfs have been failed aspirants like me. Some have been born into families that had served the bankruptcy for generations. Some have been recruited from the Fort Monastery Assist team of workers. A few had been survivors of worlds the blood angels had stored, who had chosen to observe the bankruptcy in place of continue to be on planets that no longer felt like home. However, the failed aspirants fashioned their personal sub-network inside the large institution, bound via the particular trauma of getting attempted transformation and having our bodies reject what our minds desperately wanted to just accept. All of us carried visible marks of our disasters. All had our bodies that have been wrong in extraordinary ways. All lived with steady ache and issue and the sour expertise that we had tried to turn out to be angels, and as a substitute, have become monsters. Theron's failed larynx implant had more advantageous. His hearing to painful stages even as destroying his potential to talk, leaving him hypersensitive to sound, carrying earplugs maximum of the time to lessen the communicating through sign language that maximum blood angels never bothered to study. Berenice had oomodula that went into overdrive, creating bone spurs that erupted from his returned in jagged styles, inflicting consistent ache that he controlled through meditation and ache rituals inside the reclusium, searching for penance for his failure via voluntary suffering. Lone had in part functioning ocal implants that created permanent scalar dilation, leaving him seeing too much mild, wearing darkish lenses maximum of the time, working nighttime shifts while viable to avoid the brightness that precipitated him migraines. Aina became a female serf whose brother had efficaciously transformed into a full-blood angel who had selected to end up a serf to remain near him, to serve the bankruptcy he served, to stay connected to the handiest circle of relatives she had left, even though he slightly recounted her life. Despite the fact that his transformation had taken him thus far from humanity, that he not recognized emotional bonds, that he treated his very own sister with the same remote courtesy he showed another serf. We carried our failures in a different way, managed our ache through one-of-a-kind strategies, observed motive in one-of-a-kind components of our carrier. However, we all understood every different in methods that outsiders never should. Understood the load of living within the shadow of the angels, of serving beings who had performed what we couldn't, of present in a state among human and transhuman, that left us belonging to neither category. The mental scars have been harder to manage than the bodily ones, were much less visible, however greater debilitating, manifested in methods that disrupted our service and threatened our persisted lifestyles. In the chapter, Survivor's Guilt Became Common was the regular query of why we had survived the rigors whilst others had died. Why we had been given the chance to drink from the Red Grail, whilst boys like Garvin and Mika had died before attaining that factor. Why our bodies had rejected transformation while others had succeeded. Why we had been alive and serving whilst thousands who had attempted the same course had been dead or converted into servitors. A few serfs advanced obsessive behaviors as coping mechanisms, found comfort from mental pain through repetitive movements that gave them manipulate over something in lives where control turned into, in large part, a lookery. Theron might polish the identical armor piece for hours, in search of perfection that would by no means be performed, losing himself in the meditative repetition of cloth against ceramite, inside the slow transformation of battlecard plate into glowing perfection. Brennies volunteered for ache rituals in the reclusium, sought penance through voluntary struggling, believed that if he couldn't serve as a blood angel, he could at the least share their pain, may want to take part within the chapter's suffering, even though he could not participate of their glory. I hoarded small artifacts touched by way of blood angels, a spent bolt casing from Brother Sergeant Aramis Bolter, a fraction of purity seal that had fallen from Brother Dante's armor, a bit of damaged ceramic from the training grounds wherein blood angels practiced close combat. The artifacts intended not anything objectively, had been trash that must have been discarded, but to me they were precious, were bodily connections to the angels, have been proof that I existed in their international, even though I could never truly be part of it. The crimson thirst whispered to me constantly, by no means went away, despite the truth that I was no longer a full-blood angel, no matter the fact that my transformation had failed earlier than the very last levels, notwithstanding the fact that I have to no longer bring the curse that described the bankruptcy. The gene seed material I had acquired contained fragments of Sanguinius's genetic code, carried commands for both blessing and curse. And while my frame had rejected the blessings, the curses had taken root, had determined by in my damaged genetic structure, had manifested in methods that were impossible for a failed aspirant. While blood angels again from battle, once they walked via the castle monastery with their armor still covered in enemy blood, I felt something wake up inside me. Felt a hunger that had nothing to do with meals or water. Felt a determined yearning for the blood that stained their ceramite. The fragrance of blood, whether or not human or xenos, precipitated responses in my brain that I couldn't control, that flooded my gadget with chemical substances that made my hands shake and my mouth water, and my mind turned to feeding, to ingesting, to enjoyable the hunger that grew stronger whenever I smelled fresh blood. I concealed the purple thirst cautiously, understanding that displaying such signs as a serf could imply execution or serf or conversion. Understanding that the blood angels tolerated the curse in their conflict brothers, because the one's brothers have been precious enough to justify the risk, but serfs had been no longer precious, have been replaceable, have been resources that might be disposed of if they became liabilities. I discovered to self-strength of mind my respiration while blood angels exceeded by using blanketed in gore. Learned to focus my thoughts on maintenance procedures and prayer while the hunger threatened to crush my 260-356-290-290-1944-841-328F239. Learned to avoid the areas in which wounded blood angels had been handled because the heady scent of clean blood in those places become robust enough to make my manipulate slip. However, manipulate has limits. And one night, I discovered myself within the fort monastery's butchery, wherein meals animals had been slaughtered and processed for consumption, wherein blood flowed freely and the heady scent become overwhelming. I found myself ingesting uncooked blood from the butcher's buckets, gulping it down with desperate hunger, feeling brief pride because the liquid stuffed my stomach, temporary relief from the yearning that had grown too sturdy to withstand. The blood was animal blood, now not human, not the blood of enemies or brothers. But in that second, I did no longer care. Cared best approximately pleasurable the hunger that had been constructing for months. Kate observed me there, found me with blood overlaying my face and hands, with my eyes wild and my respiration ragged, determined me in the act of betraying the manipulate I should have maintained. He checked out me for an extended second, his ruined face displaying no emotion, and then he spoke quietly, cautiously, with the voice of someone who understood what I was experiencing because he had skilled it himself. "We all have our demons, boy," he said softly. "The gene seed leaves marks on those it touches and rejects, leaves us with fragments of the curse without the power to bear it well. The crimson thirst haunts a lot of us. The failed aspirants who convey sufficient of Sanguinius's legacy to feel the hunger, however no longer sufficient of his blessing self-discipline it. You're now not the first to locate yourself here. Won't be the closing. And as long as you keep it to animal blood, as long as you don't let it control you at some point of responsibility hours, so long as you by no means allow the blood angels see this weak spot, you'll survive. He helped me easy up, helped me wash the blood from my face and hands, helped me return to my quarters without being visible by way of each person who might record what I had finished. He by no means mentioned it again, in no way used it in opposition to me, in no way mentioned it besides within the most oblique methods. But I knew he was looking me, checking that I maintained manipulate, geared up to intervene if I crossed the road from dealing with the curse to being managed by way of it. The months became years, the years have become habitual, the recurring have become my lifestyles. An existence measured in armor protection cycles and fight training and personal hours spent watching the angels educate. I was 17, then 18, then 19, developing older without developing larger. My body locked in its failed country, unable to age generally due to the fact the gene seed fabric had disrupted my boom styles. Unable to turn out to be absolutely Astartes because the transformation had failed. I existed in an abnormal center floor between human aging and transhuman immortality, developing older slowly, preserving physical capability longer than regular humans, but in no way drawing near the durability of true blood angels. I heard whispers of the Tower of Ario from different serfs, heard rumors of the Tower of the Misplaced, wherein blood angels who succumbed to the Black Rage have been saved, in which folks that ought to now not manage the demise visions have been chained in cells till they could be deployed in a very last superb rate, where they would spend their remaining time reliving Sanguinius's demise over and over till they have been granted the mercy of actual dying in war. Serfs had been forbidden from drawing near the tower, were told it turned into sacred floor in which simplest sanguinary monks and chaplains should walk, wherein the cursed brothers had been saved till their very last deployment. However, I felt drawn to the tower, felt a connection to the brothers who had succumbed to the identical curse that touched me at some point of my transformation. Felt the need to peer what waited for people who could not manage the genetic recollections, who could not face up to the dying visions that the gene seed imposed on their minds. At some stage in a renovation shift in the deep ranges of the fortress monastery, I discovered an unsealed passage, located a route that led towards the tower. Discovered myself taking walks towards something I knew I must keep away from, but could not resist. The tower held dozens of fallen blood angels, warriors who had served for decades or centuries earlier than the Black Rage took them. Brothers who had been chained in cells coated with blessed camite, who screamed and wept and roared with voices that carried the madness of 10,000 years of genetic reminiscence. A few whispered tactical facts from battles fought during the amazing crusade, coordinating assaults on enemies who have been dead for millennia. Others pleaded with ghosts, begged for forgiveness from Horus or the Emperor or Sanguinius himself, relived the siege of terror and the struggle aboard the vengeful spirit with the instant terror of individuals who believed it was happening now in this moment rather than being historic history. I watched from the shadows, transfixed by means of horror and popularity, expertise that those have been angels consumed by using the very madness that had touched me throughout my transformation. That they experienced the loss of life of Sanguinius with the equal intensity one had felt in my sarcophagus. However, they experienced it constantly, with no end in sight, without relief or respite or hope of recovery. They had been warriors, had been heroes, had served the Emperor and the chapter with difference. And now they had been trapped in their very own minds, prisoners of genetic memories they couldn't escape, ready simplest for the final deployment that could furnish them the mercy of demise and conflict. One cellular held Brother Valdris, a veteran of 400 years, currently fallen to the Black Rage after serving with distinction in campaigns across the galaxy. His armor become nevertheless intact, still marked with honors and purity seals, but his eyes have been empty of recognition, filled most effective with the visions that consumed his mind. He saw me status outside his mobile, and for a moment his eyes cleared, targeted on me with an intensity that made me step return, made me query whether or not I need to have come here. "You are one, folks," Valdris stated, his voice wearing each the intensity of an estate's end, the madness of someone who could not distinguish beyond from present. Not angel, no longer human, touched with the aid of the curse, however denied the consideration, sporting fragments of Sanguinius to your damaged frame, at the same time as lacking the strength to undergo his complete blessing. I nodded, unable to speak, not able to disclaim what he saw in me, what my scars and my malformed frame proclaimed to all and sundry who understood what they were searching at. "Do you realize what that makes you, little failed one?" Valdris persevered, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried extra weight than his in advance phrases. "You're proof that damnation can be worse than loss of life, that failure can create suffering extra entire than any punishment the Emperor might devise. We who fall to the fashion will die in glorious struggle, will serve one very last time, could be remembered as heroes who couldn't face up to the curse. You may stay serving forever, reminded of what you cannot be, current within the shadow of angels without ever accomplishing their glory, wearing the curse without the repayment in their advantages." He lunged at the bars of his mobile, then his eyes losing focus once more, his mind returning to the visions that controlled him, and he started screaming in excessive Gothic, coordinating assaults at the vengeful spirit, calling for his battle brothers to rally, to push forward, to shop the angel who changed into death while he screamed. I fled, ran from the tower lower back to the safer areas of the fort monastery, ran from the fact that Valdris had spoken, ran from the understanding that my lifestyles turned into a form of damnation worse than what the fallen blood angels skilled. Lower back in my quarters, I stared at my malformed palms, at the scars from the failed black carapace, on the body that would by no means be proper, that could hurt for the rest of my life, that could remind me every day of what I had tried to end up and failed to acquire. I understood then, understood completely, that I carried the curse of the blood angels, however lacked their glory, that I was damned but no longer blessed, broken however no longer martyred, current in a nation among human and estates that presented me the worst of both situations and the benefits of neither. I'd taken into consideration ending my existence again, discovered myself keeping a razor blade from the armory, considering the fast reduced throughout my wrists or throat that might stop the ache and the disgrace and the consistent reminder of failure. However, Cad's words echoed in my thoughts. His insistence that all of us serve, that service is all we have, that survival itself is a shape of resistance towards the universe that desires us dead. I placed the blade down, not because the depression went away, however because I would already made the selection to live, had already devoted to provider, and converting that desire now might be one very last failure. one remaining betrayal of everyone who had added me thus far. The alarm started on a Tuesday morning, started with a valid that reduced through the castle monastery like a blade that sent each serf scrambling to their obligation stations. That meant the fortress become beneath attack or about to be under attack. That intended the whole lot we had educated for become approximately to be tested. Warp signatures were detected in Gadget. Chaos incursion recognized as word-bearers traitor marines in search of to defile the holy floor of Baal itself, seeking to desecrate the castle monastery and corrupt the gene seed stocks and smash the sacred legacy of Sanguinius. All blood angels organized for instant deployment, moving with performance that came from 10,000 years of practice. From endless battles towards every enemy the galaxy ought to produce, from education that had delicate their fight capability to perfection. They might intercept the word-bearers in orbit or within the void, might prevent them from landing on Baal if possible, could destroy them in space before. They could threaten the Citadel Monastery itself. But contingencies needed to be prepared. Defenses needed to be manned due to the fact if the Blood Angels failed in orbit, if the traitors managed to land, if the castle monastery was breached, then the serfs will be the ultimate line of defense would preserve the sacred halls till the angels could go back and cleanse anything corruption had gained entry. Bankruptcy serfs were known as to defensive positions, issued weapons we had trained with, however in no way fired in actual combat, given armor that changed into higher than Imperial Guard fashionable, but nevertheless laughably inadequate in comparison to the electricity armor we maintained. We acquired lost guns and carapace armor and grenades and combat knives. Acquired the basic gadget of Imperial infantry with instructions to defend critical places, to preserve key corridors, to die if essential, to shop for time for the Blood Angels to return. Kate accrued the ones people assigned to guard the armory procedures, spoke to us with the calm of a person who had seen fight before, who had survived assaults on the Citadel Monastery within the past, who understood what we had been facing. "We are not angels," he said slowly, making eye contact with every folks in Flip. "We cannot match traitor Astartes in fight, cannot wish to defeat them through electricity or skill or any conventional manner. However, we are able to die to provide the angels time to return, can promote our lives to guard the sacred warge gear, can serve in this very last way of service is required." I checked my laser gun with palms that shook regardless of my nice efforts self-discipline them. Checked that the power mobile changed into nicely seated, that the barrel become easy, that the weapon could hearth once I pulled the trigger. I had cleaned these guns heaps of times, had maintained them and blessed them and organized them for Blood Angels to carry into war. But I had in no way fired one in anger, by no means pointed one at a living target, never had to use it to kill. The load felt wrong in my twisted arms. The balance seemed off due to the fact my arms did now not close properly around the grip. However, I held it anyway. Held it because I had no desire. Because my carrier become required. Due to the fact this was what I had educated for during all the one's combat drills. Theon signed to me, his fingers moving via the gestures all of us understood. We can no longer live to tell the tale this. I signed again, my twisted palms forming the symbols carefully. Then we die serving. It's miles enough. The attack started with drop pods hanging the outer defenses with explosions that rocked the Citadel Monastery and sent debris falling from the ceiling with alarms blaring and lighting fixtures flickering and the sound of bolter fireplace within the distance. The word-bearers got here through breaches inside the outer walls, through corridors that have to have been sealed, through protecting positions that had been organized however now not well manned, due to the fact maximum of the Blood Angels were in orbit combating the principal Chaos fleet. Cultists swarmed in first, human followers of the Chaos gods, corrupted and mutated, and screaming praises to entities whose names harm to hear. They wore armor cobbled from scrap and bore guns that have been crude however effective that fired stable rounds or closing bolts or really swung blades at whatever that moved. They came in waves, dozens of them, loads, too many to be counted, flooding through the corridors with the desperate fanaticism of those who believed they had been serving divine powers, who notioned that demise in this region might supply them everlasting praise in geographical regions past dying. I fired my laser gun, watched last bolts burn through corrupted flesh, watched cultists fall with holes through their torsos, watched them die without knowledge why I felt not anything. No triumph, no horror, Nothing but mechanical efficiency as I worked the trigger and switched power cells and persisted firing. My first kill became a cultist with 3 eyes and tentacles growing from their fingers. A human who were so changed by chaos corruption that their authentic shape become barely recognizable. The ultimate bolt hit them center mass, burned through their chest cavity, dropped them mid-charge, and I felt nothing. Felt handiest the need to gather the next target, to continue firing to hold this position until ordered to withdraw, or until I died maintaining it. The hall have become a Charlame area where cultists died by means of the handfuls, where serfs fell as properly while go-back fireplace observed them, where Brennies died to a headshot that left his brain splattered across the wall at the back of him, in which Mortgage became torn aside by means of a mutant with claws rather than fingers who got internal our line and killed 3 serfs earlier than we delivered it down. The preventing changed into determined, become chaotic, become nothing like the clean tactical eventualities we had educated for, became blood and noise and terror, and the simple mechanical act of pointing guns and pulling triggers till both the enemy died or we did. Then the Chaos Area Marines came. Wordbearers in armor painted pink like mockery of the blood angels covered in scripture that harmed to read, that seemed to move even when I used to be no longer searching directly at it, that proclaimed devotion to dark gods and hatred for the Emperor. They towered over the cultists, moved with the improved velocity of Astartes, carried bolters that fired explosive rounds that killed with each hit, that became human our bodies into clouds of blood and bone fragments with informal efficiency. Senna died, whilst a bolter's spherical hit her center mass. Died instantly. Died so absolutely that there was not anything left to bury, simply scattered pieces that were someone seconds earlier than. The Blood Angels again fire from defensive positions further back. Their bolters talking with authority, their marksmanship best, but there were too few of them. Maximum of the chapter changed into nonetheless in orbit combating the main chaos pressure. And we had been keeping with skeleton crews and desperate serfs who had in no way expected to virtually combat Chaos Space Marines. Cade died protecting a doorway that brought about the armory itself. Died shopping for time for us to evacuate sacred guns and relics. Died with a laser gun in his arms and curses on his lips. Died preventing traitors to the Imperium after 50 years of carrier to the Blood Angels. I watched him fall. Watched a word-bearer's champion reduce him down with a chainsaw that sprayed his blood throughout the walls. Watched the antique guy who had stored my lifestyle's die protective gadget that would get replaced, protecting a door that would in the end be breached anyway. But he had bought us 2 minutes, had not on time the enemy long enough for us to move critical objects deeper into the fort, and a pair of minutes become treasured, become worth of existence, was the 4x we traded whilst protecting sacred floor. The Ron died silently as he had lived, died without making a sound, because his voice were taken from him at some stage in his failed transformation. Died when a bolter's spherical hit him within the chest and destroyed his lungs and coronary heart and backbone in an unmarried explosive impact. He were signing to me seconds before, have been coordinating our movements, have been seeking to organize a preventing withdrawal that could keep a number of us whilst nonetheless protecting the critical positions. After which he become lifeless, turned into long gone, changed into nothing but a body that could be recovered later if every body survived to get better our bodies. I found myself facing Brother Sorcerer Malachar, a word-bearer's champion whose armor was inscribed with scripture that glowed with unholy light, whose voice carried the authority of someone who had communed with the dark gods at once, who radiated electricity that made my gene seed fragment scream in recognition and terror. He towered over me, 8 feet of corrupted ceramite and twisted devotion, and he checked out me with eyes that held 10,000 years of service to entities I couldn't understand. A failed aspirant, he said, his voice distorted via his helmet's Vox machine, however still wearing entertainment, contempt, something that could have been pity. How becoming that the corpse worshippers deploy their damaged cast-offs to shield their halls, that they fee sacred ceramite extra than human lifestyles, that they ship you to die in place of chance their treasured angels. He progressed casual, now not even thinking about me a hazard, no longer bothering to raise his bolter, because killing me together with his naked hands might be trivial, would require much less effort than swatting an insect. I will hold what they commenced, he said, his tone shifting to something that might have been actual offer or could have been mockery so profound that sincerity turned into indistinguishable from sarcasm. The dark gods be given all who serve. Do not reject those whose our bodies are imperfect. Do not care approximately genetic compatibility or rejection quotes. I'm able to make you powerful, can entire your transformation into something lovely and terrible, can provide you with power past what you did not attain. I raised my lace gun notwithstanding understanding it became futile. Regardless of understanding that remaining bolts would barely scratch his armor, no matter the fact that my twisted hands shook and my imaginative and prescient blurred, and I used to be going to die right here regardless of what I said or did. I am a failure, I said via lips that slightly labored, via a mouth that had grown incorrect at some stage in transformation. However, I serve genuine gods. Serve the Emperor who created humanity's finest champions. Serve Sanguinius who died defensive terror. You serve lies wrapped in strength. Serve entities that provide power via corruption. Serve false gods who care nothing for his or her servants beyond what use they can extract before discarding them. I fired the lost gun, knew the last bolt could do nothing, watched it splash towards his armor without impact, and organized to die with my failure entire, however my faith intact. Malachar raised his bolter, pointed it at my head, commenced the motion that might quit my existence in an explosive termination of recognition and suffering and bitter disgrace. The alarm modified then, modified from defensive warning to successful declaration, the sound that intended blood angels were returning, that the orbital struggle had been gained, that the castle monastery might be cleansed. Thunderhawks had been landing, their engines screaming, promises of violence and purification. Their passenger compartments packed with angels who had destroyed the Chaos Fleet and have been returning to finish what the traitors had started. Brother Sergeant Aramis arrived like an angel of vengeance, like loss of life on foot in red ceramite, his power sword crackling with power as he cut down cultists with contemptuous ease. He noticed me, noticed Malachar about to kill me, saw the scenario in an instantaneous of ideal battlefield attention, and he moved with pace that my eyes could barely music. Crossed the distance between us in seconds that felt like frozen time. Introduced his blessed blade down in an arc that caught Malachar throughout the torso. The Word-Bearer's champion tried to block, attempted to elevate his bolter in protection, but Brother Sergeant Aramis changed into faster, became better skilled, become combating with 10,000 years of amassed fight doctrine and personal talent advanced across many years of battle. The energy sword cut via corrupted ceramite adore, it was paper, via the armor and the flesh underneath, through Malachar's chest hollow space, and out the alternative facet, and the Chaos Champion fell in pieces that leaked black blood throughout the ground. Brother Sergeant Aramis stood over me, his purple armor spattered with enemy blood, his presence so overwhelming that I couldn't talk, couldn't pass, ought to best stare up at the being who had saved my existence. He looked down at me, his helmet's eye lenses sparkling pink in the darkness of the corridor, and he spoke with a voice that carried both authority and something that might were approval. You have got venerated the bankruptcy, serf, he stated simply. Your service is recorded. Your protection of the armory methods averted the enemy from having access to sacred war gear. Your sacrifice could be remembered among individuals who died protecting this holy region. The words were simple, in which primary acknowledgement of obligation finished had been not anything remarkable or profound. But I wept listening to them. Wept tears that have been half of blood because my tear ducts have been broken in the course of transformation. Wept because a blood angel had seen me, had identified my provider, had said that what I had accomplished mattered. I used to be alive, became broken, was protected inside the blood of enemies and pals. But I had served, had defended the fort, had proved that even a failed aspirant ought to make contributions to the chapter's glory. The aftermath took weeks to process, took time to recover bodies and restore harm, and cleanse the corruption the word-bearers had delivered into the fortress monastery. Hundreds of serfs had died protecting sacred ground, had given their lives to keep essential positions, had proved that carrier did not require transformation, that dedication could exist in damaged our bodies and failed aspirant, and human beings who would never be transhuman. The blood angels mourned them alongside the few warfare brothers who had fallen, recorded their names inside the chapter documents, marked their service with the same honor given to any who died protecting Ball. I helped recover our bodies of friends who had died beside me. Carried CAD stays to the coaching chamber where they might be blessed before burial. Helped gather what portions of Theron and Senna can be observed. Helped with the grim paintings of figuring out who had died and who had survived. Each name recorded become a lifestyle's ended, a carrier concluded. A person who had mattered despite the fact that they were damaged or had failed or had never attempted transformation. They had served, that they had died. They'd mattered to the bankruptcy, even if the bankruptcy not often recounted their existence. I stood in the corridor of remembrance weeks after the battle. Stood among the carved stones that listed names of serfs who had died in protection of the Citadel Monastery over 10,000 years of bankruptcy history. The names went returned to the founding blanketed each wall of the huge chamber. Recorded tens of thousands of those who had served without becoming blood angels who had given their lives protecting the Citadel or maintaining the war gear or defending vital facilities in the course of assaults. Some names had notations beside them, short descriptions of the way they had died or what that they had defended, small acknowledgments that their deaths had intended something past easy biological termination. I found Cad's call carved into the stone. Discovered the quick notation, died protecting the Armorium. Found proof that his 50 years of service were recorded, that his existence had mattered enough to warrant permanent memorial. I discovered Theron's call, discovered sinners, determined the names of dozens of serfs I had recognized, had labored with, had shared food and conversations and quiet moments of understanding with. They had been all recorded here, all given the identical honor, all stated as having served the bankruptcy with determination that warranted remembrance. I found out then status in that corridor reading the ones' names that this changed into the dignity to be had to me. One of a kind from the distinction of blood angels who soared into war, but actual though. The honor of people who made the angels viable, who maintained their war gear and defended their castle and died, shielding the sacred legacy of Sanguinius. No longer the dignity of transhuman warriors smashing the Emperor's enemies. However, the glory of 8 employees who served without transformation, who gave their lives for a chapter that barely acknowledged their life, who found cause and carrier despite the fact that the service turned into invisible, thankless, performed completely within the shadow of beings who had carried out what they could not. Brother Chaplain Sarath located me there, his skull helm making him look like Demise on foot. His presence nevertheless intimidating despite the fact that he had saved my life by giving me the choice to serve as opposed to die. He looked at the names carved in stone, checked out me status amongst them, and he spoke with a voice that carried both authority and something that could were compassion. Could have been information that service took many paperwork, and all have been vital. You may have run at some stage in the assault, he said slowly, cautiously. Many serfs did fled to the deep shelters, selected survival over defense, and we do no longer judge them for it due to the fact terror is an affordable response to going through chaos. Space Marines. Due to the fact selecting to live isn't the same as deciding on to betray. You stayed, you fought, you held your role till the Blood Angels back. Why? I considered the query, considered all of the feasible answers I could supply, considered lies and partial truths and easy evasions. However, I was too tired to lie, too exhausted to offer anything but the reality that had sustained me through 3 years of carrier, 3 years of living within the shadow of angels, 3 years of current in a body that harmed constantly and jogged my memory with every breath of what I didn't turn out to be. Because I failed the transformation, I stated eventually, the words coming slowly, carefully, pulled from the deepest elements of my knowledge. However, I did not fail the Blood Angels. I did not fail the Emperor. I did not fail the provider that Sanguinius demands from all who carry even fragments of his legacy. This is the best manner I can serve. The most effective way I will make contributions. The simplest way I'm able to justify my endured existence in a universe that has no need for the weak or the damaged. It is sufficient. It has to be enough due to the fact it is all I have to supply. Brother Chaplain Sarah nodded slowly, his cranium helm revealing nothing but his voice carrying approval, carrying popularity that I understood something many did now not. That carrier changed into no longer measured in power, but in determination. That the Emperor becomes served with the aid of all who gave their worth from the mightiest Primarch to the bottom serf. You recognize what many do not, he stated quietly. Power isn't the degree of carrier. Dedication is. And you have verified your determination through your refusal to desert your post, via your willingness to die defending our halls, through your popularity of a lifestyles lived in carrier, even though that lifestyles brings you consistent ache and steady reminder of failure. He supplied me merchandising then provided to make me master of the armory, serves to provide me multiplied responsibility and authority over other serves to recognize my carrier through extended role and further duties. I accepted no longer due to the fact I desired authority, however, because the provide got here from the chaplain, because refusing would be refusing the simplest reward the bankruptcy ought to give, because accepting intended acknowledging that my service had fee, that even a failed aspirant should contribute in significant approaches. Weeks later, I stood inside the armory sprucing the armor of Brother Sergeant Hermes for his next deployment. My twisted arms moving across the red ceramite with practiced performance, my fingers locating every scratch and carbon scoring and blessed residue that marked his carrier to the bankruptcy. My body nevertheless harmed, nonetheless jogged my memory with each motion that I was broken, that I'd in no way be what I had tried to turn out to be, that I carried the curse of the blood angels without their benefits. However, the paintings became meditative, become functional, changed into concrete contribution to the bankruptcy's ability to salary warfare towards the emperor's enemies. I whispered prayers as I worked, prayers to the emperor, prayers to Sanguinius, prayers that recounted what I was and what I could in no way be. Emperor, I am no longer what I wished to be. I'm no longer the angel I attempted to come to be. I'm now not the warrior I dreamed of being when I drank from the red grail and felt your divine essence burning through my veins. However, I'm what you want me to be. I'm the servant who continues the armor of your champions. I am the defender who holds the fortress whilst your angels march to war. I'm the failed spirit who observed reason in provider, even though that provider brings constant pain and regular reminder of failure. Allow this service be enough. Permit this willpower justify my lifestyles. Permit this contribution rely, even though it is small and invisible and conducted absolutely in shadow. I stuck my reflection inside the polished ceramite, saw my malformed face, saw my twisted palms, noticed the scars from the failed black carapace that protected my torso in abnormal styles of hardened tissue. I used to be hideous, turned into broken, changed into a failed test in transformation, was the whole lot I would in no way wanted to end up. But my eyes held determination, held cause, held the information that I had determined, which means in a life that maximum could keep in mind no longer worth residing. I'm Dren, I idea, the inner monologue forming phrases I might in no way talk aloud. I didn't turn out to be a blood angel. I'm deformed. I am vulnerable as compared to the angels I serve. I will never bounce into warfare or realize the respect of the transhuman warrior or experience the delight of crushing the Emperor's enemies with my very own hands. However, I serve. I keep their armor. I defend their fortress. I keep their legacy through small acts of dedication performed each day without recognition or reward. I stay in the shadow of angels. And in that shadow I have located my cause. Have discovered the only which means available to a person who tried for greatness and carried out handiest survival. I am a chapter serf of the blood angels, and this is enough. Must be sufficient. Maybe enough until the day I die serving in the shadow of beings who executed what I could not. It isn't always the existence I desired, not the honor I dreamed of once I stood within the wastes of Bal Secundis and watched the Thunderhawks descend from the stars. But it's miles the lifestyles I have. It's far the carrier I will supply. It's far the reason that justifies my persevered existence in a universe that measures really worth in violence and energy and the capability to wreck the Emperor's enemies. I polish the armor. I maintain the conflict gear. I guard the citadel while protection is required. And that I serve every day, each hour, each breath in the shadow of angels who strike a chord in me continuously of what I did not emerge as. And that service, humble and invisible, and conducted absolutely in darkness, is